From the battlefield of the Middle East to the halls of Congress, President Trump's second term is already, well, deeply challenging the very meaning of America First. You sent us a stack of sources, articles, research, your notes, highlighting the big questions swirling around this administration. So today we're taking a deep dive into those. We're exploring the priorities, the challenges facing President Donald Trump's second administration, and especially how his America First foreign and domestic policies are actually playing out. Okay, so let's unpack this. Just 6 months into his second term, the president, who, campaigned on being a peacemaker and unifier and ending all wars, finds his administration caught in a rapidly escalating Middle East conflict. Missiles are flying after Israel attacked Iran, and the risk of dragging U.S. troops into a regional war feels very real. It's a critical moment.
It really is. And what's truly fascinating here, and what your sources clearly show, is how this unfolding situation immediately puts the president's core America First pledge to, well, its most rigorous test.
Yeah.
And this isn't just a foreign policy challenge. It's revealing deep ideological fault lines within his own conservative base almost in real time.
That's a key observation, right?
Yeah.
We've seen influential right-wing figures, people like Tucker Carlson, Senator Rand Paul, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, strongly cautioning against U.S. involvement. They're arguing that supporting another foreign war or giving what they call unconditional support to any nation fundamentally contradicts the whole America First platform, the one emphasizing national sovereignty, avoiding these global entanglements.
Indeed. It's a direct challenge to the idea of conservative realism that the administration generally champions. This philosophy prioritizes U.S. interests above all else, emphasizing skepticism towards interventionism abroad, especially when conflicts lead to huge costs, lives, debt, inflation. It's about not getting drawn into fights that don't directly serve American security.
And this isn't just talk, is it? The public opinion polls you shared reflect this sentiment. Before the U.S. ordered its own strikes, a YouGov poll showed that a remarkable 53% of Trump voters initially wanted the U.S. military to stay out of the Israel-Iran conflict. That wasn't a fringe view. It really reflected a clear desire among his base to avoid those endless wars, like Iraq and Afghanistan. That number, 53%, it's quite striking.
It absolutely is. It really underscores how powerful that America First non-interventionist impulse is within a large segment of the electorate. People remember the promises, right? Bring troops home, avoid new wars. However, your sources also highlight a fascinating twist here. After President Trump ordered U.S. strikes on 3 Iranian nuclear facilities, a later YouGov poll recorded a significant shift. Suddenly, 68% of Republicans approved of the U.S. bombing.
Wow. Okay, so we see a base that initially says stay out, but then largely approves when the president acts decisively. What does that tell us about the dynamic here between the philosophy and the leadership?
It suggests a complex, almost fluid interpretation of America First. While the initial gut feeling is non-intervention, the president's actions, once taken, seem to redefine what America First means for many supporters. It becomes less about a strict policy of non-engagement and more about the president's prerogative to act in what he defines as the nation's best interest, even if that means military action. It highlights a certain flexibility within the movement. It can unify people behind the president, but, well, sometimes it contradicts those initial preferences.
Interesting. And even with that shift in support after the strikes, the underlying concerns about escalation didn't just disappear, did they?
No, not at all.
The polls you shared show that 81% of Democrats and, crucially, 51% of Republicans still believe the strikes were very or somewhat likely to lead to a bigger conflict. So that fear of a wider war is still very much there.
It is. And that brings us to President Trump's own actions and statements. He initially talked about diplomacy, saying, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. Other than that, I want them to be successful. Kind of a surprising statement there. But then he later confirmed he knew about Israel's attacks beforehand. And he put the onus for the attacks on Iran, essentially blaming them for not making a deal.
Right.
And his subsequent order for U.S. strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities was a definitive shift. Critics called it blatant aggression. Supporters framed it very differently as peace through strength.
That phrase, peace through strength, it's a really interesting lens, isn't it? It suggests a belief that being assertive militarily, maybe even acting preemptively, can paradoxically prevent bigger conflicts down the line.
Precisely. It's a high-stakes gamble, though. Huge regional and global implications.
Absolutely. That tension between wanting to avoid endless wars and wanting a strong, assertive foreign policy seems to define this administration's approach. It's a constant balancing act.
It really is. And it's likely going to shape much of his second term on the world stage.
Okay, so from these global hotspots, let's pivot a bit. Let's bring that America First lens back home. Because just as the administration is tackling international issues, it's also set on a major domestic policy agenda. And with Republicans controlling Congress now, they have a much clearer path, right?
That's a critical point, yes. The 2024 elections gave Republicans that 53-47 Senate majority, and they kept a narrow House majority, at least 220 seats. Unified control is significant. It means President Trump is, well, much better positioned than in his first term to actually push his priorities through. Fewer legislative roadblocks, potentially a more streamlined process.
So let's start with the economy. Trumponomics, as it's often called. What are the core ideas there? And maybe what are the trade-offs involved?
At its heart, Trumponomics is really a protectionist, America-first strategy. It's designed to boost American industries, American jobs. The key tools are things like imposing tariffs on foreign goods, the idea being to make imports pricier and local stuff more competitive. Then there's a big focus on corporate tax cuts and deregulation.
To encourage companies to come back. Yeah. Onshoring.
Exactly, onshoring, bringing manufacturing and jobs back to the U.S. The thinking here is a fundamental shift, moving away from prioritizing, say, global efficiency towards emphasizing national resilience, self-sufficiency. It's a trade-off many seem willing to make now, even with potential short-term costs.
But tariffs can mean higher prices for consumers, can't they? Or other countries hitting back with their own tariffs. How does the administration plan to handle that pressure?
That is the delicate balance, yes. Proponents argue the long-term gains domestic jobs, a stronger industrial base, outweigh those concerns. They believe American consumers ultimately benefit from a more robust domestic economy. And your sources show real optimism about this among his supporters. A striking 67% of Trump voters expect inflation to be lower in the next 6 months.
67%, that's high confidence.
It is. It shows a strong belief in the effectiveness of these policies, and it contrasts sharply with Harris voters, 49% of whom expect inflation to rise. So very different outlooks there.
Okay, so the economy is front and center. But perhaps no issue embodies America first more directly or stirs more debate than immigration. What changes are we likely seeing there?
Definitely stricter enforcement and border security. That's paramount. We're likely looking at a multi-pronged approach. Things like potential mass deportations, continuing to build the wall on the U.S.-Mexico border.
And those older policies coming back.
Right. Re-implementing things like zero tolerance for illegal crossings and the Remain in Mexico policy, where asylum seekers have to wait in Mexico. It's all part of what you could call a very protectionist, localized, and securitized view of the border.
What about legal immigration in all this? Particularly for skilled workers like the H-1B visas.
That's a critical question. With cabinet picks like Stephen Miller and Tom Homan, who are known for wanting tighter H-1B restrictions, we can expect a continued push to reduce those numbers. This could pose a real challenge, especially for, say, the Indian skilled workforce. In 2023, they received over 70% of all H-1B visas.
70%.
Yeah. So for you, as a listener watching these trends, it could mean a shift in the global talent pool. Companies might find it harder to bring in specialized skills from abroad, pushing them maybe towards more domestic hiring or looking elsewhere.
Okay, let's shift again. Healthcare. It's always a big issue, but seems maybe a bit overshadowed this term by the economy and immigration.
That's generally true, yes. It's not making the top headlines quite as much, but proposals are definitely emerging, mostly focused on market-based solutions. We could anticipate moves to repeal or significantly alter the Affordable Care Act, ACA. The focus seems to be on things like boosting price transparency for drugs, cutting healthcare bureaucracy.
Trying to drive down costs through competition.
Exactly. Empowering patients, promoting competition, using free market ideas rather than government regulation. For you, this might mean changes in insurance options, maybe more emphasis on health savings accounts, that sort of thing.
And finally, on the domestic front, the Supreme Court. Always crucial. What's the outlook there?
Well, President Trump is poised to nominate conservative justices if vacancies arise. That's pretty clear. And doing so could really solidify or even expand the court's conservative majority for decades. The judicial philosophy often emphasizes originalism and textualism, interpreting the Constitution based on its original meaning or plain text.
And the practical impact?
Potentially significant. It could affect rulings on major issues, abortion rights, religious liberties, the balance of power between the federal government and the states. It's a long-term play to shape the country's legal and social direction.
Okay, so America First is clearly reshaping domestic policy. How does that same philosophy translate to the world stage? How is it redefining U.S. engagement with global powers and traditional alliances?
That's where this idea of conservative realism really guides things globally. The administration tends to view the world more as an arena of competition, less as a global community. Doesn't necessarily mean tearing everything down, but it does mean critically asking, do these old institutions still serve U.S. interests today? And adjusting relationships with both rivals and allies to get a better competitive edge for America.
Let's take China. The sources suggest a continued China hawk stance, right? What does that look like in practice for trade for supply chains?
It means a serious push for decoupling, or at least reducing dependency. You have figures like Secretary of State Marco Rubio, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, both vocal China critics. Trump's campaign talked about completely eliminating U.S. dependency on China. That could mean things like imposing very high tariffs, maybe up to 60% on Chinese goods.
60%, wow.
Yeah. So for you, this drive for supply chain diversification, the China Plus One strategy, could mean manufacturing shifts. It might benefit countries like India as companies look for alternatives, but it could also mean higher prices for some consumer goods, at least initially.
And what about Russia? How does America first impact that relationship, especially with the war in Ukraine still ongoing?
Well, President Trump's focus on, let's say, reducing U.S. global entanglements, some call it isolationism, might allow countries like India more leeway to maintain their ties with Russia, especially for energy, without facing strong U.S. pushback. And his goal of ending the Russia-Ukraine conflict that could have wide ripples. Depending on how it ends, it might even potentially weaken the growing China-Russia partnership, which has seen China really prop up Russia's defense industry. Its complex U.S. disengagement could shift power dynamics in unexpected ways.
In alliances like NATO, how are they viewed? Is the commitment still there?
The administration insists it's not intent on tearing down the international order, but it is questioning if institutions built decades ago are up to the task now, and crucially, if they serve U.S. interests. A key theme is burden sharing, demanding allies pay their fair share for defense, meet those spending targets.
We've seen that push before.
Right. And this forceful and direct approach has led some NATO allies to increase defense spending. But critics worry. They see it as almost a cash for protection scheme, potentially undermining trust in U.S. commitments and maybe even emboldening adversaries if alliances look shaky.
Okay, one last area. The environment. This administration seems set on a very different course here.
Indeed. The whole environmental and climate policy area under Trump 2.0 is, well, shrouded in uncertainty is how one source put it. But the signals point clearly towards rolling back regulations. Regulations often seen by this administration as hurting American industry.
So what does that mean in practice? What are the key directions?
You should probably anticipate less strict regulations on carbon emissions and fossil fuel production. That could significantly affect climate change efforts, obviously. There's a strong focus on boosting domestic energy production, drilling, mining, fracking, the whole drill baby drill idea. The goal is pretty explicit. Lower gas prices for Americans, achieve energy independence, stop relying on foreign sources.
In the Paris Agreement.
The stance there remains speculative, but given Trump's past actions pulling out before and his rhetoric about ending the Green New Scam, it suggests international climate agreements are not a priority compared to domestic energy production.
So wrapping this up, we've covered a lot. From the Middle East tensions testing America first, the internal debates within the conservative base, to this really ambitious domestic agenda economy, borders, deregulation. It's clear America First isn't just a catchphrase. It's really a core principle shaping, well, almost every aspect of U.S. policy. It's constantly being tested, constantly being redefined in practice.
Absolutely. This whole period reflects a powerful current among many Americans, a desire to prioritize national interests, to question those long-standing international commitments, and really to reclaim a sense of sovereignty in a world they see as increasingly competitive, maybe even hostile. And the impact of these choices on global stability, on economic growth, on the very fabric of American society, we'll be feeling that for years, probably decades.
So as you reflect on these really significant shifts, and you think about balancing our own prosperity with America's role in this rapidly changing world, maybe ask yourself, what does a truly America First approach mean for the next generation? How will these policies reshape the world you navigate every day? And here's a final thought to chew on. Considering that strong conservative push for less foreign entanglement, for fiscal responsibility, how will the real ongoing costs of global competition, both the economic costs and the strategic ones, ultimately stack up against that America First promise of national strength and lasting peace?